My wife cheated on me with our neighbor, then, after our divorce, she claimed I stole $250, $0 from our joint account, only to reveal she secretly drained the estate and vanished with everything, leaving me penniless and fighting legal battles I never saw coming. Hello, everyone. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Now, let's begin the video. Using a throwaway for obvious reasons, with certain specifics modified to preserve anonymity. I never thought I'd be the guy sitting here telling everyone how my marriage fell apart because of a cheating wife and a betrayal that I still can't fully wrap my head around. It all started with some small signs, things I brushed off at first, thinking maybe I was just overthinking. But then, the pieces started falling into place in ways that made me sick to my stomach. I'm telling you this story not just to vent, but because I know I'm not the only one who's ever been by someone they trusted completely. Her name was. We'd been together for about 8 years, married for 5. I thought we had a good life, steady jobs, a nice house, 2 dogs, and a future we talked about a lot. She was gorgeous, confident, and always had a sharp tongue when things didn't go her way. She could be bitchy, yeah, but I loved her despite that. She had this way of making you feel like she was always right, and I guess in some twisted way, I liked that she was so fiery. It made her interesting. But looking back, I realized that fiery side was also a mask for her being manipulative and selfish. The first sign of trouble came when she started working late more often. Not just a few extra hours here and there, but entire nights. I'd ask her what she was doing, and she'd brush me off with some excuse about meeting clients or catching up on work. But I knew she wasn't working late every single night for no reason. I'd catch her sneaking her phone around, hiding texts. She'd get defensive if I tried to look at her messages, calling me paranoid or insecure. That should been a red flag, but I was so in love that I ignored it. Then there was the way. She started dressing differently, more revealing, more provocative. She'd wear clothes that accentuated her curves, and I'd catch her looking at herself in the mirror more often than usual, fixing her hair, adjusting her makeup. It was like she was trying to reinvent herself or maybe just impress someone else. I didn't want to believe it, but I knew deep down that she was cheating. The gut feelings kept gnawing at me, but I kept telling myself I was overreacting. Things got worse when I noticed money going missing from our joint account. Small amounts at first, maybe a few hundred here and there, but then larger sums started disappearing. I'd ask about it and she'd come up with some excuse, say she was paying for a spa day or some new clothes. But I'd check the bank statements myself, and I'd see transactions I didn't recognize. Some deposits from a mysterious consulting firm she claimed she was working for. I didn't think much of it at first, just brushed it off as her trying to cover her tracks or maybe even some kind of side hustle I didn't know about. I was naive. I thought I knew her, thought I understood her, but the signs kept piling up and I was too blind or too in love to see what was really happening. Then one night I decided to follow her. I needed to know. She had been acting secretive lately, always on her phone, sneaking around. I waited until she left for one of her late nights and I followed her. She went to the neighbor's house, Tom. That's when I saw it. She was in his driveway, kissing him, holding hands, looking like they were about to do something more. I froze, heart pounding, feeling like I'd been punched in the stomach. I couldn't believe it. My wife, my partner, was cheating on me with the guy next door, Tom, who I'd always thought was a decent guy. But I guess everyone has their secrets. I watched from a distance, trying to process what I was seeing. The betrayal cut deep, sharper than anything I'd felt before. I felt sick, angry, humiliated. How long had this been going on? How had I missed all the signs? I knew I had to confront her, but I also knew this was just the beginning of what was going to be. A long, messy fight. That night I went home and sat in the dark, replaying everything I'd just seen. My mind was racing, trying to find some way to make sense of it all. I felt like I'd been hit by a truck. The woman I loved, the woman I thought loved me back, was out there sneaking around, lying, cheating. And the worst part, I had no idea how deep her lies went or how much she'd already taken from us. Little did I know, that was only the start of what was coming next. The next morning, I woke up feeling like I'd been hit by a freight train. My head was pounding and my stomach was in knots. I couldn't sleep after what I saw, and I kept going over it in my mind, trying to come up with a plan. But honestly, I was just angry, furious. The kind of anger that burns so hot you can't think straight. I knew I had to confront her, but I also knew I needed to gather evidence first. I couldn't just accuse her without proof, not that it mattered much at that point, but still. I decided to check her phone again just to see if she slipped up. I waited until she left for work, then grabbed her phone when she wasn't looking. That's when I found the texts. There were hundreds of them, flirty, intimate, downright explicit sometimes. She was telling Tom things she never told me, describing their plans, their secret meetings, how she loved the thrill of sneaking around. I saw pictures, 2 screenshots of their conversations, some of her in bed with him, smiling like she was the happiest woman alive. I felt my stomach turn over. My wife, my partner, was out there lying to my face every day, fucking the neighbor behind my back. I couldn't believe I'd been so blind. All those late nights, all those times she was working late, she was really with him. I started thinking about all the money she'd been draining from our accounts, big deposits, cash withdrawals, payments to some shady accounts I didn't even recognize. She'd been stealing from us for months, maybe longer. I felt like I'd been punched again, this time in the gut. All the trust I'd ever had in her was shattered. I sat there, staring at her phone for what felt like hours. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what to do next. I knew I couldn't just confront her without evidence. I needed to catch her in the act or have something to show her that I knew everything. But how? I didn't want her to get wind of my suspicions and run. That's when I started planning my move. I decided to set a trap. I installed a hidden camera in the living room, pointing at the doorway where I knew she'd come home from work. I wanted to catch her red-handed. I also started monitoring the bank accounts more closely, tracking every transaction. I wanted proof of her stealing money, proof of her affair, proof of everything. I was determined not to be again. I was going to get answers, no matter what it took. A few days later, she came home acting normal at first. But then, late in the evening, I saw her slip her phone out of her purse and start texting someone. I watched her type, then quickly hide it again when she thought I wasn't looking. My heart pounded. I knew it was Tom. I knew she was planning. Hit him again. I took a deep breath and decided it was time for the confrontation. I called her into the living room, trying to keep my voice steady. "We need to talk," I said, trying to sound calm but angry underneath. She looked at me with that bitchy smirk she always had when she thought she was in control. "What's going on? Why are you acting so weird lately?" I pulled out her phone and placed it on the table. "I know about Tom. I saw the messages, the pictures. I know you've been cheating on me." Her face flickered, and for a moment she looked genuinely surprised. Then she scoffed, rolling her eyes. "Oh, please, you're overreacting. Those messages are nothing. You're just insecure. I was just talking to him about some work stuff. You're making a big deal out of nothing." I clenched my fists. "Nothing, nothing. You've been lying to me for months, stealing money, cheating, sneaking around. I found your secret accounts, your withdrawals. What the hell is wrong with you?" She crossed her arms, trying to look dismissive. "Look, I don't know what you think you saw, but you're crazy. I've been busy with work, that's all. And as for the money, if I took anything, I'd tell you I'm not some thief. And Tom, he's just a friend. You're blowing this way out of proportion." I felt my blood boil. "A friend? You're sleeping with him, aren't you? I saw you kissing him in the driveway. Don't lie to me now." Her eyes narrowed. "You're paranoid. You're jealous. Honestly, I don't know what's gotten into you. Maybe you're the one who's been cheating on me, huh?" That hit me like a punch. I stayed silent, staring at her, trying to keep my composure. But inside, I was raging. I knew I had to get out that night to get some space and think. I couldn't stay in the same house with her anymore. The betrayal ran too deep. I told her I was leaving for a few days, packed a bag, and left. But I wasn't just leaving to cool off. I was leaving to plan my next move. As I drove away, I realized I was in uncharted territory. My entire world had been turned upside down. She lied, cheated, stolen from us, and now she was gone, probably with Tom, probably with some of the money she drained from our account. I had no idea how deep this rabbit hole went, but I knew one thing: I wasn't going to let her get away with it, not without a fight. I was angry, betrayed, and hurt, more than I'd ever been in my life. But I also knew I was going to get to the bottom of this, no matter what it took. After I left her that night, I didn't sleep. My mind was racing, trying to piece everything together. I kept going over the evidence I'd found, her secret texts, the missing money, the way she lied so easily. It was like I'd been hit with a wrecking ball. I felt numb, but at the same time, a burning need for justice, for some kind of explanation. I knew I couldn't just let her walk away with everything she stole and the lies she told. The first thing I did the next morning was call my lawyer. I needed to know my options, especially about the finances. I had no idea how much she'd drained or where she'd hidden the money, but I knew she'd been planning this for a while. I also reached out to a private investigator I'd heard about through a friend. I wasn't about to just sit around waiting for her to come back or for her to make a move. I wanted to be prepared. While waiting for my lawyer's advice, I started digging through our financial records myself. I pulled bank statements, credit card bills, and even looked into her email account. She'd been clever, creating fake accounts, laundering money through different channels. The amount she took was staggering. I couldn't believe I'd been married to a woman capable of this level of deception. I found transactions totaling over $250, $0, drained from our joint account and transferred to unknown accounts. She'd been planning this, I realized, for months. I started to feel sick at the thought of how much I'd trusted her. My lawyer called back with some bad news and some good news. The bad, she had already hidden most of the money and she'd filed for divorce, claiming I stolen the same $250, $0 from our joint account, an outright lie. The good, I had enough evidence to fight her in court. I also had the texts and the bank records showing her deception. I decided I was going to fight for everything, for my rights and to get some answers. Meanwhile, I hired the private investigator. I needed to know where she'd gone, who she was with, and if she'd taken more money. The pie started tailing her, and within a few days, he reported back that she'd been seen in different cities, always with a different man, sometimes with Tom, sometimes with others. She'd been moving around, probably trying to hide or stash what she could. It was clear she'd planned her escape, and she was serious about disappearing with everything she had. The legal battle started to heat up. Filed for divorce quickly, claiming I was abusive and had been stealing money. That was a complete lie. I never laid a finger on her and I had the proof of her theft. But she knew how to spin stories, and she threw everything she could to make herself look innocent. Meanwhile, I was left to pick up the pieces. I had to prove she was the one who drained our accounts, that she was the one cheating, and that she'd been planning this for months. It was every day brought new surprises, more lies, more deceit. I found out she had opened multiple fake accounts under different names, transferred money into offshore accounts, and even bought property with the stolen cash. She'd been living in luxury, all paid for with our money, while I was left penniless and the betrayal cut so deep I felt like I was walking around in a fog. One night I sat down and looked through all the evidence I'd collected. I realized that I had to be strategic. I couldn't confront her directly anymore. She was too clever, too manipulative. Instead, I decided to let the courts handle it. I filed a detailed complaint, attaching all the proof I had: bank statements, texts, witness statements from the pie. I wanted justice, but I also wanted to make sure she paid for what she'd done. As the legal process dragged on, I started to feel a strange mix of relief and despair. Relief because I was finally taking control, fighting back against her lies, and despair because I'd lost everything: my wife, my savings, my trust in people. I wondered how I'd ever rebuild my life after this. How do you recover from betrayal like this? How do you even begin to trust again? The questions haunted me daily, but I also knew I had to keep going. I couldn't let her get away with it. I had to see this through, for my own sake, and to send a message that betrayal has consequences. I kept telling myself, someday I'd come out of this stronger. But right now, I was just trying to survive the storm she'd unleashed on my life. The legal fight went on for what felt like forever. Every week, new documents, new accusations, and more lies from her side. Played the victim, claiming I was the one stealing from her, that I was abusive, and that I was trying to ruin her reputation. It was exhausting to watch her spin stories, especially knowing how much she'd already betrayed me. I had proof, screenshots, bank statements, witness accounts, but she had her lawyers working overtime to discredit everything. Meanwhile, I was trying to keep myself afloat. I moved into a small apartment, just enough to get away from the chaos. I couldn't stay in the house anymore. Every corner reminded me of what I'd lost. The dogs stayed with me, thank God. They were the only ones who still seemed to trust me. I threw myself into the legal process, gathering more evidence, preparing for depositions, and trying to stay sane. It was a constant emotional. I'd have moments of hope, then sudden despair when I realized how much she'd taken, how far she'd gone. One of the most shocking revelations came during the depositions. His lawyer tried to claim that I was unstable, that I'd been emotionally abusive, and that I'd been secretly plotting to steal from her too. They even brought up some old arguments trying to paint me as the bad guy. But I had everything on paper, texts, emails, bank records, that proved she was lying. She'd been the one secretly draining our account, having affairs, and planning her escape. It was frustrating to see her lie so convincingly, but I also knew the truth was starting to come out. Then came the day I got a huge break. The court ordered an audit of all our financial accounts, including the offshore ones had opened. The results were devastating for her. They found multiple accounts with large sums of money, over $200, $0, that she transferred out of our joint account. The auditors traced it back to her, and suddenly her entire story was unraveling. The judge saw through her lies, and I could see the shift in the courtroom. Justice was starting to feel within reach. That same day, I received some shocking news from the pie. Had been spotted in a different city, staying at a luxury hotel. She bought a new car with the stolen money, an expensive SUV, and was living a life of luxury while I was left with nothing. It was like watching her live my life while I struggled just to keep my head above water. I felt a mixture of anger and helplessness. How could she do this? How could she turn her back on everything we had built? My mind kept circling back to the moment I saw her kissing Tom. That image haunted me. I wondered how many other lies she'd told, how many other men she'd been with. I started to realize she'd been planning this for months, maybe even years. She manipulated me, lied to my face, and now she was gone with all the money, all the truth, and all the trust I'd ever had. It was a brutal lesson in how betrayal can destroy everything you think is real. The worst part was feeling so powerless. I couldn't force her to come back or make her admit everything. All I could do was fight in court and hope the truth would come out. I was exhausted, emotionally drained, and angry at myself for trusting her so blindly. But I also knew I had to stay strong for myself, for the dogs, and for the possibility of rebuilding someday. I started slowly picking up the pieces, reaching out to friends who'd known us, trying to find some kind of support system in the chaos. As I looked at the mountain of evidence against her, I couldn't help but think about how different everything could have been if she'd just been honest. Instead, she chose lies, betrayal, and greed. I'd never felt so betrayed in my life. But I also realized that I couldn't let her win. No matter how much she'd stolen, how much she'd lied, I was determined to see this through. I owed it to myself to get justice, even if it meant tearing down everything I thought I knew about her. By the time we reached the 5th month of this nightmare, I was exhausted but no closer to feeling like I had any control. The court proceedings dragged on, and lies kept piling up. She kept claiming I was the one stealing money, even though her own bank statements proved otherwise. She was good at spinning stories, but the evidence against her was overwhelming. Still, she had her lawyers working every angle, trying to delay, trying to dismiss everything, trying to turn the tide in her favor. It was a constant battle, and I felt like I was fighting a losing war. But I refused to give up. I kept pushing, gathering more proof, and working with my lawyer to find every loophole or inconsistency in her story. Meanwhile, the pie kept feeding me updates. She'd been spotted in another city, living in a penthouse with a new man, spending money like it was water. She drained everything. My savings, our joint account, the estate, and vanished. I couldn't help but feel a mixture of rage and sadness every time I saw her living the high life while I was left with nothing. One night, I sat in my new apartment, staring at the pile of documents and evidence I'd collected. I felt a strange clarity, like I was finally beginning to understand just how deep her betrayal ran. She had lied, cheated, stole, and manipulated everyone around her. I was just another pawn in her game. The worst part was realizing I'd trusted her completely, and she'd used that trust to destroy me. It was a sickening feeling, knowing I'd been played for a fool. And then, out of nowhere, I got a call from my lawyer. The judge had scheduled a hearing to freeze her assets and start proceedings to recover the stolen money. It was a huge step forward, but I knew it wouldn't be easy. Had already hidden most of her wealth, and I was pretty sure she'd already spent a significant chunk. But this was a start. It meant I had a fighting chance to get some of what she took back, to hold her accountable for her actions. I also decided I needed to take some personal steps. I reached out to a therapist, finally admitting I needed help processing everything that had happened. I'd been holding it all inside: anger, betrayal, helplessness, and it was starting to eat me alive. Talking to someone helped, even if it was just to vent or cry a little. I realized I'd been so consumed with fighting her that I'd neglected my own mental health. That was a mistake I wouldn't make again. In the midst of all this, I also started to rebuild my finances. I found a part-time job, just something to keep things afloat while I fought in court. I sold some of the belongings I no longer needed, cut back on expenses, and tried to focus on the future. I knew I couldn't undo what she'd done, but I could start to rebuild what I'd lost. It was a small step, but it gave me a sense of control I'd been craving. Looking back now, I realize how much this whole experience changed me. I used to think trust was everything, but now I see it's fragile and easily broken. I learned that people can hide their true selves behind a mask, and sometimes those masks are pretty convincing. I also learned that revenge isn't always about violence or anger. It's about making sure the truth comes out, about fighting for what's right, even when everything seems stacked against you. Most important of all, I learned I'm stronger than I thought. Betrayal cuts deep, but it doesn't have to define you. I'm still healing, still fighting, but I know I'll come out of this better, more cautious, more resilient. And I hope anyone reading this who's going through something similar understands that no matter how dark it gets, there's always a way forward. Sometimes it's just about taking one more step, even when you think you can't. Because at the end of the day, the truth will come out, and justice in some form will follow. The court finally scheduled the hearing to freeze her assets and start the process of recovering what she'd stolen. I remember sitting in that courtroom, feeling a strange mix of exhaustion and cautious hope. Was there, looking just as smug as ever, trying to act like she had everything under control. But I knew better. I had all the evidence: bank statements, texts, witness testimonies, and I was ready to fight for what was mine. The judge listened carefully, and when the moment came to decide, the ruling was clear. Her assets would be frozen, and an investigation would continue into the full extent of her theft. That day felt like a small victory, but I knew it was only the beginning. She'd already spent a lot of the stolen money, hidden some of it offshore, and I had no illusions about how hard it was going to be to get it all back. Still, I felt a flicker of relief knowing I was finally making progress, that I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was a fighter. In the days that followed, I kept working with my lawyer, pushing through the legal battles. I also kept tabs on her whereabouts through the pie. She was still moving around, trying to stay ahead of us, but she couldn't hide forever. Every new report, every piece of evidence felt like a small victory, proof that her lies were unraveling, that her empire of deception was crumbling. Meanwhile, I had started to rebuild my life in ways I never thought I would. I found a steady job, moved into a modest but safe place, and started focusing on myself. Therapy became a crucial part of that process. I'd spent so much time angry and in shock, but I realized I needed to heal mind, body, and soul. I had to learn how to trust again, how to forgive myself for trusting her so blindly, and how to move forward without bitterness consuming me. Looking back, I see how much I've grown from this nightmare. It's been a brutal lesson in betrayal, greed, and resilience. I learned that sometimes the people you love can turn out to be the ones capable of the deepest deception. I also learned that justice isn't always swift, but it's worth fighting for. That the truth, no matter how ugly, will eventually come out. Most importantly, I learned that I am stronger than I ever gave myself credit for. I survived something I thought would break me, and I came out the other side with a clearer sense of who I am. I know I'll never fully forget what happened, but I also know I won't let it define me. I've learned to be cautious, yes, but also to believe in my own strength. So to anyone reading this who might be going through something similar, don't give up. Keep fighting. Trust yourself enough to know that even in the darkest moments, there's a way out. Sometimes justice takes time, but it's always worth pursuing. And in the end, the truth will set you free, no matter how long it takes.